a little bit too. Cool, whatever.
Hello. What happened? Jay. Oh, okay. Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's meetup on indexing and ingesting data using the Python client into Elasticsearch. Coming to us live from his home office in San Diego, California, we have Jay Miller. Jay is a developer advocate here at Elastic, and yeah, super happy to get into our topic here today of getting data into Elastic with Python. But before we kind of get started on that, Jay, I do have a few questions for you, if you're comfortable with that.
Yeah, let's do it.
Cool. So, Jay, how did you come to join Elastic and become a developer advocate?
So my Elastic story is very interesting because Elastic was like the first tech company that I've ever worked for. And like becoming a developer advocate was super new. And it was something that I thought would take me years to get to. And I did it. So I was like, yeah, I can retire now and be happy. Just kidding. But no, I started out in the military and then went out of the military into like system administration. And then from there, joined marketing, which is like a completely different thing. And along that entire storyline, I was like learning to program using Python and JavaScript and other things to kind of make that work. And in the end, I just said, hey, I'm giving talks, I'm doing all this stuff. Maybe I could do it professionally. And I reached out to the Python community that was, connected with some folks in the Elastic community. And they reached out to some folks on the team, and then they told me, hey, you should apply to this company. It's a really good company to work for. And yeah, I did, and then got interviews. And that was it. Like I was like, hey, this was hard in that it took me a long time to do it, but also like Elastic was very smooth in the entire process. So it was both easy and hard getting there.
Awesome. Yeah, well, we're super lucky to have you. And what else did I want to ask you? So it sounds like when you're describing that like your Python journey started before your Elastic journey did. So I'd love to hear from you about kind of how you picked up coding and how you picked up Python in particular.
So a long time ago, I got really into podcasting, and I wanted to do a podcast, and I do my own podcasts and other things. But I wanted to figure out a way to automate some of the processes that I was doing around stuff at work. At work, I was using like PowerShell to automate stuff because I was a sysadmin in a Windows environment. So PowerShell, like that worked. But I wanted something that would kind of span across that platform. Across multiple platforms, I guess. And I joined the local San Diego Python user group after doing the traditional free code camp because, we all do free code camp at some point in our lives. They're awesome. So shout out to them. But after that, I got engaged in that community. They taught me a ton. There's a lot of amazing people in that community. So big shout out to them. And just over time, working with mentors to learn more and more and more. And then applying that also into the workplace and doing more and more and more, and like pushing the boundary every time was like, can I do this with Python? Yes, I can. Awesome. Okay, well, now what about this? And then like learning how to do that. And some of my friends and mentors will pick on me because some of the things that I do, they're just like, why would you ever do it this way? This is crazy. But it was the way that I learned because a lot of it was just solving problems. So yeah, and then honestly, over time, I just fell in love with Python more and more, got more involved, went from being always the mentee to trying to do more mentoring and helping and kind of paying back all of the kindness that was given to me when I first joined the community.
That's awesome. Yeah, I love how in your story we see this little community thread being woven throughout each step of your journey. That's awesome to hear. And look at you now. Now you're here about to share
Made
that.
it.
Yeah, you made it. You made it, but also like you're about to share this knowledge that you've picked up sort of organically through community, through similar sort of user groups and tech forums / communities, and now you're here and you're going to give back today to that same community. So
it's interesting that, you know, a lot of folks that, like, I'm a college dropout, so I don't have like a traditional CS background. So it's super interesting that, like, we often hear people say that they're
Jay, I do think that being a college dropout is a bit of a typical CS pathway.
Okay, maybe it is. Okay, maybe it is then. But we often hear like, oh, I'm self-taught. I learned on my own and all that stuff. And it's like, I didn't. I learned bugging so many people, like, time and time again, asking them questions like, hey, how do you do this? Hey, I've checked Stack Overflow and I still don't get it. Can you explain it to me like I'm, a 2-year-old, and just like break it down for me in like the most basic of ways? And I mean, that's how I learned, and that's how I still learn. Like, I still have those mentors that I ask all the questions all the time, and like, it honestly, to me it's a more rewarding path, but it's also like a never-ending journey, a never-ending story, one might say. But I think it's definitely something that we kind of need to stop with the, like, I learned by myself, unless you truly were like learning on your own with no one ever to help you and no one ever commented on you. In that case, come find me, because I will help you. Like, you don't have to go at it alone. I will be more than happy to help you with that.
That's awesome. Yeah. I'm super excited to get into sort of the nuts and bolts of today's presentation. So I guess I'll hand things over to you, Jay, to kind of kick things off then.
Okay, I'm going to reshare my screen because I got like thrown out when I last did that. And then hopefully we don't start like coming to a crawl. And let me close that out and let me clear that out. Okay, can you see a gray screen?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. I can't see anything else, so I'm just going to assume that everything is good. And folks, if you have questions, whether it's about this, whether it's about my career, I have ADHD, so I can do my best to try to balance the two, but I'll probably do terrible at it, but that's okay. We're going to try to make this work. And I want to start off by saying, yes, I work for Elastic, but the way that I do things isn't necessarily the only way to do things. And I'm going to show you a few ways to do this. Like, it doesn't have to be step 1, open up Elastic Cloud, step 2, do this other thing. And I hope that I can make that as clear as possible. But people want to learn about getting your data into Elasticsearch using Python. And there are plenty of ways. I'm going to show you most of them. I can't show you all of them because we don't have that much time, but I will show you a lot of different ways that work. And we're going to start off by getting some data. So the data that we're going to be looking at, I'm going to switch over to another browser, clear off all of those, and open up a fresh browser. That way, I'm not cheating. And I have an Elasticsearch instance stored on another computer in my house. So we'll use that. And we're going to be getting some data similar to, oh dear, I am going to show y'all something that you don't need to see because I don't have the password. Actually, let me do this just so I can. Or actually, Faith, if you don't mind, can you just show my face? That'll get some data. You showing my face yet? Okay, cool. I didn't realize that it was going to log me out, so I need to get my password for that. Okay, we're good now. So you can
put in the live stream.
Yeah, put in the live stream. Uh-oh. Oh, duh. Come on. Ah, that's terrifying. Okay, so never mind. Show my face again because I have to grab this data again.
While we wait, I would love to hear where everyone is joining from today. It's helpful for us. One, it's interesting. Two, it's helpful in terms of scheduling. So if you want to post in the chat where you're dialing in from, that would be awesome. I will start.
I'm in San Diego, by the way, so land of the fish tacos, the best fish tacos. And okay, now I'm logged in, but don't show my screen yet. There we go. Now I'm good.
All right.
But we're here. So what I'm going to be creating here is very much something that looks like this, but has data in it because we're going to look over the last 14 years. And I will say this is generated data. This is fake. I'm not tracking my cat's every move and whim for the last 14 years. I probably could, but I don't want to. That sounds very painful. But what we're looking at is ultimately let's go to all of the actions of a group of cats and whether or not we can call them good or bad. Now, whether or not you think cats are great or cats are evil, save that for another discussion because we're going to use the data that I have collected, and I say that with so many quotations because I'm generating the data and I'm going to show you how I generated this data over the last 14 years, hypothetically. So let's go into the first thing, and that's getting this cat data. So I'm going to use my lovely program called Cat Data Generator. And it's basically a Python script. All it does is it gives me a couple of cat names. If you own a cat, put it in the chat and we will add it to the cat names. And your cat can be involved in this too. And if you have some good or bad outcomes that you think you would love that your cat did or didn't do, tell me as well. But basically what we do is we create a list of good outcomes, we create a list of bad outcomes, and we select a bunch of random choices. And at that point, we give it a random time frame between now and the last however many years that I set. For this, I'm going to say the last 15 years, and we're going to create 400,000 instances of cat behavior, whether or not they be good or whether or not they be bad. Do we have any names or actions that we need to add to the chat? Okay.
Names, Ollie, Ollie, and Zeep, Zeep.
Okay, I love it. Any outcomes? Anything that your cat does that's like adorable or pure evil? I don't have an opinion either way. I'm a cat person. I have a cat. My cat is Peanut Butter at the top. My cat before that was Idjit, the one right below it. So I'm here.
I think good outcome plays fetch.
I need to teach my cat to play fetch. That's awesome.
It's funny, Jay, that you think you can teach a cat something. My cat just came that way. A bad outcome, you already have scratches, furniture. I'm trying to think what else he does that's bad. Yeah, I don't have a bad action. He's perfect.
Okay, that's great. And we're going to, just so I can show you, I do have some cat data already generated. Don't worry about that. I'm going to remove it right now. And it's gone. So cat data is now gone. We're going to generate some new cat data here. So Python cat data generator, and it's going to take a second. Thank you for the audience participation. I feel like it's always more fun when people's cats are proven to be angels or jerks, either one. So
addicted to catnip.
Or addicted to catnip. That's a good one too. That's done, and now we can see a giant list of cat data. Oh, well, we could if you could read that, but it's very, very hard to read. So, but I've proven that there's data there. Don't worry. This hard to read data in a CSV file, we're going to add it to Elasticsearch because that's why we're here. So let's get rid of that. And I'm going to show a few different ways to do this, and I'm going to start with a few scenarios. The first one is simple. I have one data point, and I need to get it into Elasticsearch. This is great if you already have a data set and you're adding data to it. You know, you've been collecting cat data over the years, and you just need to add that next entry of the time where, you know, the cat tried to lick your ear and then decided that it was a good enough treat to bite. So let's go there. I'm actually going to do all of this from scratch, but if I need to rebuild it, don't worry. I have some examples that I can use. So I'm going to make a new directory. Actually, I'm not going to make a new directory. I'm going to move all the Python stuff. No, hold on. Going to make a directory. We're going to call it backup, because that's a good name. And then we're going to move all the Python stuff into backup there. So now we should be looking at this. We have no Python files here. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to create a connection to our Elasticsearch instance. And the way that we do that is I'm going to create a new file. You can do this you can do it one way, but there's more than one way you can do that one thing. I'm going to show you the way that I do it. You don't have to do it this way. This is just how I do it. So I create a whole separate Python module called connection.py. In that, I import Elasticsearch, from Elasticsearch. If I can type, I import Elasticsearch. And that is our module that creates an Elasticsearch object and a client that we can connect to, we can search from, we can do a whole bunch of things. And then I'm going to create an index. We'll say that index is cat data. And just to make sure we know that it's special, I'm going to generate a year, month, day object here. And then we'll use that throughout this entire process to show that we're adding to that particular index. After that, we're going to create a client connection, and that's going to look like Elasticsearch. Why can't I think of the information there? Here we go. And what we need is we need our hosts, which are... That's, by the way, while I'm talking out loud so I can type. But if you have any questions, Faith, feel free to interrupt me and answer question or ask the questions, and I'll just answer them.
Haven't seen any yet.
Okay, awesome. Then I will keep going. I'm going to add my computer, which, because I can't remember the exact name of it, I'm going to go into my backup and just grab that. You didn't see that. It didn't exist. Nope, didn't see that either. There we go. All right, so we have our host. That is my other computer. And then we need our authentication, which I'm using HTTP auth. All of this is stored locally on my network, so I'm kind of being overprotective. Doesn't necessarily need to be that protective. But we need a username and a password. I actually store those as environment variables so I don't have to manually type them in and get them wrong. So I can import OS, and from there we're going to say from os.environ, which says, hey, from the operating system's environment variables, let's get our ES user, and let's get our, just copy that, and we'll do an ES password. Perfect. And now if we've done everything right here, we've created a connection to the Elasticsearch client. So I should be able to do a print client. I think you can do print client, but I think you might have to do client status. I have some of my friends in the chat, so if you know how to show that you've made a connection, it has no attribute status, so we're just going to remove that. And we'll just print client and see what happens. Okay, so we've created that instance, this Elasticsearch instance, and from there now, as we do this, as we show these multiple ways of doing a thing, we don't have to do that ever again. We just have to import that information into our project. So I talked about let's upload a single instance. Faith, give me a good single instance of something that your cat has done.
Sleep.
Sleep. Is that a good action or a bad action?
Oh. I would say, we'll say it's a good action to keep things easy.
Okay, I love it. Well, how about this? Slept at the foot of your bed, because that's adorable. Like,
Yeah,
I think everyone can agree that's adorable. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to create a doc, which is basically a dictionary. And what's your cat's name?
Sorry, I was on mute. His name is Ollie.
So Ollie. And the action was a good one. It's a good action. The comment was sleeps at the foot of the bed. And the way that I have this working, we're going to need a date, but I'm going to be lazy and I'm just going to use that. We need to import some things, as I mentioned before. So let's import, I had a brain fart there. So from our connection, as I mentioned before, we're going to import our client and we're going to import our index. So we don't have to worry about that stuff. Then from date time, we're going to import date time. That way we have that date when we tell it to generate. And now how do we load this in? Simple. We say client.index, and then we provide the index name, which we've added the index, and we add the document into body, which would be that. And if everything goes well, we should see this work. And just so that I don't have to bounce back and forth, I'm just going to say Python that, which just runs this. Okay, and it looks like it ran. And just to clean up a thing, so we don't have constant print statements happening, let's do that. Now, let's go back to Elasticsearch here. Let's go to our stack management. We can confirm that, that's fine. Let's check index management to see if we have it. We have it. We have cat data for that date. We have storage size, how many documents we have. And let's create an index pattern for it really quick. Ignore all those errors because that is for other data that I don't have anymore. Okay, perfect. And we'll just do that. And we see we have the time field here, so we can add that. And let's look at our data. So inside of Kibana, I just go to Discover. Maybe if I didn't click something twice, there we go. Let's go to our new index pattern. And nothing for the last 14 years. Cat hasn't been doing anything, but we see at the very end for June 29th, which is today at this time that I generated, which I believe is at GMT because I did not add any type of time zone information. We have our index, we have our ID, we have it was a good action. The cat's name was Ollie, and the comment was Ollie sleeps at the foot of the bed. So we have successfully added information, a single point of information into Elasticsearch with Python. Thank you. Have a great day. I'm kidding. We're going to do way more than that. So that works for one piece of data. But what if we have a lot of pieces of data? And that's where we're going to move on to a couple of options for you. I'm going to show you the hard way first, and then what I like to consider as the easy way second. So let's create a new time. We'll call it multiple entry so I can remember what I'm doing. We're going to do the same thing we did last time from connection, import, index, and client. So we have that information. Now we have all that data stored in the CSV file. If I need to show you again, I don't need to show you again. We have all that data there. So from there, we can go and import CSV because Python has a module that handles CSV files. It works perfectly. We can say with open our cat data.csv as CSV file. Now we're going to tell it to turn that into a dict reader. And what that does is that converts the CSV into a dictionary. So we can say, actually, I messed up there. We actually need to import one more thing from Elasticsearch. So from Elasticsearch, we're going to import helpers, and we're going to import bulk. So if you were here for last week's live stream, we talked about this in .NET, that all of the Elasticsearch clients come with this helper called bulk, which Elasticsearch on the back end is doing a lot of REST API stuff. So with that, you have a lot of things that need to happen. You also have a lot of things that you need to be thinking about, such as transport limits, rate limiting, how large the files are that you're sending over the web. What do you do if there's a disconnect? All of these things. Bulk will do this for us. So we don't need to do too much there. And I'm going to make sure that I'm doing this right by looking at my backup file, because I don't want to get this wrong and confuse people. That's what I thought. Okay, again, you didn't see that. So the first thing we have to do is we have to create a reader. And again, that's going to be that CSV file that we create. And that's going to be, wait, now I can't remember how I do it. CSV dict reader and then that file. Okay. So CSV dict reader, and then the object that we're reading, which is that. We're going to store that in a variable. And then from there, we're going to say bulk, and we're going to give it something to read, reader. And we're going to say the index is the index that we provided. And I feel like I'm missing something. Oh, the client. Yes, that would make sense. And the client that we're pulling from. Again, all of this information that we imported up here. So we're saying, hey, what I want you to do is I want you to do a bulk add or bulk create of all of the rows in this CSV file. I want you to use the client information that we've provided. I want you to use the index that we've set. And the CSV file is the dictionary output of whatever the CSV file that we have. So this is just 3 lines. And this will work in most cases. If you have a CSV file, you need to get it going, then this is a really good way to do it. Just to prove that it works, let's save this. Let's run Python and tell it to do a thing. It's going to be thinking for a second because, again, 400,000 objects were being generated at this point in time. I don't think I mentioned that, but we're generating based off of that CSV file 400,000 objects that span over the last 15 years. So that's doing its thing. It's thinking, it's thinking, it's thinking. While I'm here, do we have any comments or questions that I can't see?
No, I don't think so.
Awesome. So I like bulk, and while this is doing its thing, I'm going to show you why this couldn't be the best option. This is actually reading everything as it is. That could be a problem because that means that while the first time we loaded this, we had it in a string. We go to our single entry. We added this date time now. This is a date time. This is a string. Python knows what to do with it. Or sorry, this is a date time object. Python knows what to do with it. Elasticsearch knows what to do with it. Here, we've made no assumptions about what this is. So we've just loaded all of this stuff as strings, and we hope that Elasticsearch is going to be able to work with it. Let's find out. Did it work? It's loading. It's thinking about it. We could check. We could go in and see. It looks like it worked. Oh, look at that. We got lucky. It knew what to do with it because the data was generated in a format that it could read, which is this time date format that you see there. If we would have put, 62921 42436. Like, it may not know what to do with that. If we would have put it in some other format, even like we had to put it in the very specific format that Elasticsearch recognized by default. Of course, we can go in and tell it like, hey, we want you to translate it to this other format. But without doing that by default, we can run into a lot of problems. So, but this seemed to work. Again, it was 3 lines. I'm actually going to bump it up to 15, 16 years just so that we have all the data, because it's only showing 14 out of the 15 years. There we go. So all 400,001, because apparently Ollie recently slept at the foot of the bed. So we have that one in there as well. So this is fantastic. Congratulations. We have imported 400,000 records into Elasticsearch using probably a total of 15 lines of Python. Not a lot. It's pretty good. So I mentioned all of those problems that we had before. What if we would have wanted to verify that the date was correct and all of this other stuff? Well, then you got to go in here and you got to create another function that is, let's see, convert to date. And then that takes a single point, and then we have to return x to date is equal to import date util. As you can see, this is starting to get way more complicated. We're having to add other features in, and actually, this would actually be date util parser. And then we would say parser, parse, X date. And you'd have to do that, and then you'd have to come in here and you'd have to do a map on reader, and it would be convert to date the reader. And you'd have to do that, and it would still work. Like this would work, but now we've added a lot of complexity, and I'm working with very simple data. Imagine that you're working with very, very complex data. Recently, I indexed like police call records for the last 7 years for the city of San Diego. And there's a bunch of data in there, and the data isn't super consistent. So you have a bunch of functions involved, and it gets kind of hairy. So here's the thing that I like to do, and this is my one-liner option. Python, we also ship a tool called Elot, and this is going to be the second of 3 Python tools that are managed by or maintained by Elastic that we update and we keep up to date with our release cycle. If you're not familiar with Elot, which I'm sure many of you aren't because it's fairly new, maybe you're familiar with Pandas. Pandas is a data framing tool. In the data science world, Pandas is kind of a big deal. If you're not in the data science world and you're not familiar with Pandas, think of it as glorified spreadsheeting. Like this idea of I have a bunch of data and I want to look at it, but I also want to be able to work with it in a way that's logical. So we're going to do this. I'm going to show you the one line on how we would upload our data into Elasticsearch using Elot, which is actually doing very Pandas-like things. So we're actually just going to come down here, and we'll just make a function, and we'll just call that function to make things easier for us. That way, all this stuff up here that's happening won't take place. Okay. So with Elot, all we have to do, we don't need this, we don't need this. This would obviously break. Actually, I'm just going to delete all of this because it's going to break if I don't. We're going to import Elot. I imported it as ED. You don't have to do that, but it just makes it a little bit easier shorter to type. And Pandas has a PD suggestion there as well that you can use. So we're going to do Elot CSV to Elot. We're going to give it the CSV file. This cat data CSV. We're going to give it the ES client, which is client. Let me just put these on separate lines so I can explain them out a little bit better. You're going to give it the EX destination index, which is our index. And we're going to do something very simple, which is we're going to tell it to parse dates equals true. And that's it. So that's a one-liner, and what it's doing is it's taking that CSV file. It's putting it into what it would consider a glorified spreadsheet. It's saying, hey, if this is a date, and actually, if I remember correctly, you need to tell it what field is the date. So we're going to say date like that. So it's going to look at the date column, and it's going to go, I know this is supposed to be a date. I'm going to try to parse it as a date, and when I send it to Elasticsearch, it's going to make it a date so that we don't have to worry about guessing. We don't have to assume that the data is formatted correctly. We can just say, hey, this works the way that we want it to. Now, if this weren't going to be as simple, all we would have to do is then import pandas. And this is pretty simple. Import pandas is PD, and check this out. Everything else stays the same. We remove those two lines. That's it. So it's actually shorter. And then from there, we would still do some Elot magic. We would say, this is a data frame. And then inside of Elot, we would say Elot pandas to Elot. And we would add all of that information that we had before.
Hey, Jay, we have a question.
Okay.
What is the benefit of pushing that data from the CSV into Elastic over just viewing it in a tool like Power BI?
So that is a good question. If you have millions and millions of records, and remember, we're talking about a handful of cats here. So like a handful of cats and their actions over the last several years, you could put all this data in Power BI and you can visualize it using Power BI. You can do all those things, 100%. I'm going to answer that question, but I'm not going to answer it just yet because the very next thing that I'm going to show you will hopefully answer that question. Is that okay? I'm hoping that's okay. But the short answer is, if you're just visualizing the data, Power BI, sure, that's fine. You can visualize it in Kibana. You can visualize it in Power BI. If you want to put it in another, ETL or another analytics tool, you can absolutely do that. That's perfectly fine. But if you want to interact with it, if it's Elasticsearch data already, like if you're working with Elasticsearch data and you need to put more data into Elasticsearch, here you go. If you are building a website and you need to make that website searchable and you have that information on Elasticsearch and you already have your base data, but you need to get it indexed, here you go. The sake of visualization isn't the only reason why we would put it into Elasticsearch. We would use Elasticsearch for a plethora of reasons, and I'm going to show one right after this. But Elot, very similar. Like I said, you could do pandas to Elot, and you would provide all of that same information I provided up here, like this. But you would just put the pandas part there in front. And if you're working in data science, this allows you to, if it's first in pandas, you can then work with it the way that you want. And that's actually what I've done in other projects. I've loaded everything into pandas first. I've figured out how do I make the data as consistent as possible, and how do I get rid of the data that's going to corrupt it, or how do I replace that data with, a marker that says malformed data or something like that, so that that can be addressed at a later time. But from there, I then say, okay, Elot pandas to Elot, and then provide the same information, the same 3 rows, Actually, not even the last row at that point, because I've probably already parsed the dates. So I provide that data, and then it's in Elasticsearch. And if we want to see that work, that's fine. I just need to do one thing here. I need to go to our connection, and I need to change the index to 2. Do I want to do that? I don't want to do that, because that's going to give us 8,000 records there. So let's do it this way. And then, again, we say the magic words, which are Python %. It's going to load. It's going to give us an error. The ID field is defined more than once. That is my fault. ID. This is where my cheater in the chat, Seth, who maintains Elot, might be able to help me here. But I think you can say, I think you can set the index as a field. I think that's it, but I could be wrong. Unexpected argument index. Just didn't see the error message. Okay. By the way, Elot just means elk. So yeah, I get to see that every time I go and look for Elot. CSV to Elot. And I believe the issue that we're running into is that I already have an ID defined. So I have to tell Elot that, hey, there's already an ID. So don't try to do this other ID thing.
Seth has suggested something.
You have to put me on full screen so it doesn't blow everybody's eyeballs away like that. Yep. There we go. We'll do that. If ES or ES if exists replace and that ES destination index. ES index pattern, ES destination index. By the way, really quick, will this code source be linked in GitHub? You'd like to revisit Elot and learn more? Yes, it will be. I do have a GitHub repo for this. And set ES if exists equals replace ES destination index. Seth, the problem is that there's already an ID. So I actually have, I get what you're saying. So ES if exists equals replace. That'll just tell us that we can overwrite the data that already exists. But the problem that I'm running into is I already have IDs set here. So I need to tell Elot that the ID it already exists here. And this actually is a good reason why you could use something like pandas, because in pandas, I would just say pandas, read CSV. I'm gonna think that, paste it again, just to make it easier for me. All right, so what I've done here is I've just said, let's load in pandas. We're going to create this object as a CSV, and I will comment all this out just so we can print it out and see what we're looking at. And I don't need this, and I don't need these. I just need those two. Let's do df set index equals ID, if I remember correctly. And we'll print the head of that pandas entry, because if I remember correctly, do that, it should load. Okay, and now we've set this as the ID. It's there. Oh, I completely messed up the set index portion there. Try that again. Okay, yep, so stuff is there now. We've set the index. I think that also needs to be in place equals true. That's why we're not seeing it change. There it goes. Okay, so now we have the ID in here. And at that point, as I mentioned before, we just uncomment this. We say pandas to Elot instead of CSV to Elot. And if it exists already, we replace it. We set the destination index to index. We add the client. We don't have to tell it to parse dates. We don't have to set this. We run it. And before I do that, I'm going to get rid of that print statement. We run it. And this time it shouldn't give us the error. It gave us the error. Missing. Oh, yeah. It gave us an error because I didn't tell it what data frame to pull from, which should be that. And I'm guessing because it's taking significantly longer to run, that means it's running. Let me go back here. I can't see Faith, so is the screen showing?
Yes, the screen is showing.
Awesome. So I should be able to go to our stack management, index management, and we see cat data to 25,000 records. And that's going to slowly climb. That's going to keep climbing while that's running. Again, this is a good example of if you need to load that data in, but you need to do some work on it. As you can see, it takes one ID not being correct or having two IDs, and then all of a sudden things start to get a little hairy. So being able to take it out of the CSV format and put it in a format that you can work with and manipulate might be a better option. And of course, Elot is the tool that I use for that alongside of pandas. There, in my opinion, is a way to do this in Elot by itself. I just don't remember at the top of my head what it is. So I'm going to roll with that. The next step here is, well, this is still running. So Elot might be a little bit slower, but it's also doing a lot more. Okay. I'm going to let that keep going. And there is a phrase that you can use here that is, it's ES refresh, and you set that to true and it'll refresh more and more. I'm going to create a new instance here and let that kind of work in the background because I don't necessarily need it in front of me. Let me do some Python stuff here. Don't worry about this too much. I just need to get into that environment. Okay. So I've shown a couple of ways to get like a single piece of data and now a lot of data. And now I want to go back to a single piece of data. And the best example for this is actually based on the comment that was asked, or the question that was asked earlier. And in order to make that work, I need to move one file out of backup, and that's going to be our Flask implementation. I think everything else can stay. All right, so I'm going to run Python Flask implementation really quick. Hopefully we don't get yelled at. We didn't get yelled at. That's great. I'm going to now create another panel over here. We'll just set this off to the side. We don't need to know about that too much. Let's open Safari, and I'm going to go to my local host, so it's on my computer. I built this site called Is My Cat a Jerk, the cat version. And you can search it. I am connected to the wrong data set. Okay, so yep, I can see here's an instance of something that happened. I can find some other instances that happened here. And this is using that same, this is using an older version of that same CSV data where we have the cat's name, the action, and then whether or not it was good or bad. And I threw some styling on there just to make sense of it. And of course, we can come here and we can create a new entry that says, Ollie, he slept at the foot of the bed. Bit action, the date's fine, we hit go. Now when we go here, we check Ollie. Oh, we now have an entry for Ollie. So how did we do that? We just used, quote unquote, the web to update Elasticsearch. That information was in Elasticsearch. It's now there. So I don't have enough time to run through absolutely everything that is required to get Flask up and running, get Tailwind CSS going and all that stuff. That is another live stream that we can do at a different time, but I do have enough time to show you how the Elasticsearch part of that works. So I'm going to do that. And we'll start by going into our Flask implementation. Maybe if oh, nope. It's done yet? Oh, it is done. Cool. So let's quit this. We're going to go into our Flask implementation. There we go. So this is about 100 lines of code. Some of it that we don't need because I forgot to delete a thing. But we don't need to worry about most of this. What we need to worry about is a couple of things, and that is here down to about there. And we can talk about Flask WTF or WT forms and talk about that in a second as well. But what is Elasticsearch DSL? This is an import that we haven't talked about yet. So we've been working very low level with the system. As I mentioned before, Elasticsearch uses like REST APIs to send a bunch of commands into Elasticsearch and then index all that data based on those commands, and it'll return some feedback the same way that it got it as in REST APIs. That's great in that it allows for a lot of flexibility to work with. You can work with your data in many different ways and then get it into the format that you want and then load it. But the difference here is if we want to work high level, if we want to have some of the assumptions made for us and we want to do things that, yes, there is an API command for in Elasticsearch, but it doesn't feel very Python-like, Pythonic, some people would say. This is where Elasticsearch DSL comes in. Again, I've mentioned him a couple of times. Seth, wonderful maintainer, maintains along with our team and along with the open source community of maintainers, helps keep all of this stuff running so that I can come in and complain when it doesn't work in live streams. But Elasticsearch DSL is going to be how we take a single instance, we format it exactly the way that we want it, or in this case, we use Flask and Flask WT forms to format it the way we want it. And then we upload it into Elasticsearch like that. So we don't need to look at any of this stuff. All of this is not important except for here. The first thing that we did inside of Elasticsearch DSL was we imported what's called a document, and we imported a few of the different field types. That first field type is text, and then we also imported date. So this should look familiar. We have cat, action, comment, date. Same thing we've been collecting this entire time. One thing we didn't add is ID. If we don't add an ID, Elasticsearch will generate one for us, so that's fine. So the next thing that we do is we create a form class using Flask form from Flask WTF. All this does is create HTML templating and data processing for Flask so that we don't have to do it. So as you see here, we have one for cat, comment, date, and action as well. see a string field, a text area field, a datetime field. We're throwing in validators to make sure everything is required. And we even make one of them a selection field. That way you can just click the button and choose whether or not it was a good action or a bad action. At that point, we just have some other Flask stuff. So we have our search here, which is using the Elasticsearch DSL. It's using a phrase called multi-match, which allows us to query a value across multiple fields. We're sorting our value in descending order using sort negative date. We're indexing. We can actually fix the issue that we had before from instead of importing client and providing that manually, we can just add index here. And then when we get to this, we can say index. This might not work because we have a function called index, so I'm just going to call this home instead. Make that a little easier. It shouldn't make a difference in anything that we're doing. And then we're querying it and we're returning results. Again, this is all how you get data from Elasticsearch. We're focused on how you get the data in. So at the top, I had, and we'll reorganize this a little bit just to make it easier to look at. We'll grab all of that. We'll go down to the bottom and we'll paste it here. There we go. So we have our class. We have our form. After that, we have a route called create. That was what happened when I hit the button. I hit create, and then it started running and doing all of that stuff. From there, we have our form that we added. That's the form that we created. Form equals my form. We say, was the request method a post? That means did someone go in on the website? Did they fill out the data? Did they hit go? If they did, then awesome. We can run with it, and we're going to do some stuff. What we're going to do is we're going to create an object or an instance of that cat report object, which is, and we're going to pull the data from the form. So form cat data, form action data, form comment data, form date data. We do all of that because Flask WTF has done all of the processing of that information for us and validating it and making sure that it's in the right format and all of those wonderful things. Then we're going to do report.save. Report just being the variable that we saved it as. It could be doc, it could be whatever you want to call it. But we save it. And at that point, inside of this class, we've already told it, the name of the index is index. And the name of the client we're using is client. So when we hit save, it's just going to create that entry for us. Now, I'm sure that some folks would mention, like, why do we do this in Flask and not Django? In Django, it's very much the same. The only difference is instead of Flask WTF, you would just use a Django model. And that's kind of it. That's the main difference. There's some other little things there. I prefer Flask, especially with demos, because it's simpler to show. So that's why we did it this way. But that's it. And then at the end, we return the same page. We could return like a success handle here. Well, if I don't know what I just did a lot of things. Oh, okay, no, I did the right thing there. Okay, so instead of render template, which is just a Flask template, which is the HTML and CSS and all that, we could just say return. Great job. Like, just something to say we did it. And then, of course, if I didn't do any error handling here because I'm in kind of a controlled environment, had I done some other things, it would have to be, I'd have to handle like errors and stuff like that. But I hope that I've been able to successfully show that there are a few different ways that you can date.
Oh, I think we lost you, Jay. Can't hear you or see you. I I can't hear you. I still can't hear you. No.
You still can't hear me.
Now I can. Now I can.
There we go. It just took a second to catch up. Don't worry, we have more than one microphone where we're going. So to wrap all of this up, because I think we're running at time, the easiest way to do this, if I can go back to my screen. All right, there we go. I'm going to blaze through the recap. So we have a singular entry, single entry. We have our connection, our simple data. It's a dictionary. We have our index. We say the body is the doc, index it. Good job. Before we do that, we set up a client, which is here. So we have an index with some data, and we give it a unique name for our index so we could find it. We give it our host. We give it a username and a password. Make sure you provide security. If you're building this locally on your machine, by default, it will not have that information. You will need to set that up, but that is not hard to do, and we have documentation on that. If you would like me to go through that, that is another live stream at a different time. But we have shown how to connect to one. We've shown how to connect to more than one, which was our multiple entry. I use Elot because Elot gives you a little bit more flexibility with pandas to manipulate the data as you're going through it. For cat data, it might be a little much, but I have come to appreciate having this as a backup when I need to manipulate tons and tons of data. I mean, I've used this exact same method to load like 3.5 million records in the matter of like a minute. And using Elot in that case tends to be the better approach for me personally. And of course, if you don't want to use Elot, if you want to do it the old school way, you can do the 3-line command of you open your CSV file, you create a dict reader using CSV, and then you import it using the bulk importer, and you have your index available there. And then last but not least, when you have all of those things happening and you're comfortable doing that, you can then go a little higher level, move up to Elasticsearch DSL, import and do things in Flask. And at that point, you're no longer operating in the command line, but instead you are now operating at the top level on a website somewhere where you can now say, hey, look, here are all the things that Ollie did. Faith, I know Ollie is your cat, so I'm not going to say that Ollie is a bad cat. I'm just the data.
He is a bad cat. I tell him all the time.
But I hope that now you have a few ways to use Python to index your data into Elasticsearch. I did mention with Seth one thing that I would recommend. If you're working on a website and you're doing all of this for a website, just for a website, similar to the question that was asked earlier, like if you're just visualizing data, but if you're just building a website, Elasticsearch might be a lot. Check out App Search. We have an App Search platform as well. I do hope that in the future I can do a how to get your data into App Search using Python live stream. It might be the same data, but who knows? Maybe we'll come after the dogs next. Who knows? We'll see. But that is it. I'm going to stop sharing.
Cool. Well, I think we've gotten through all of the questions in the chat between Seth's help and you answering as you go along. So thank you, Jay. That was super awesome. I'm glad to now have empirical data that proves that my cat is bad.
just remember this data was generated randomly. So if it looks like the data that you might have collected, then maybe, but all data here was fake and no cats were harmed or insulted in the making of this live stream.
Awesome. Okay, well, thanks again, Jay, and we'll catch you all next Tuesday. Same time, same place.
Awesome.
Bye, everybody.